Hello everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty. If you're new here, my name's Melanie. Welcome, welcome. And my returning art and craft friends, I'm so glad you're choosing to spend a little bit of crafting time with me today. Today I'm going to be showing you how I created a whimsical style mummy that's sitting on a cute little pumpkin jack-o'-lantern box. Now all of the items are made from the scrap wood pile today. Today I'm a part of a YouTube collaboration. We have two hosts today. We have Monica with Up All Night DIY, Dawn with Shabby Meets Bling, and we also have a guest host today, the lovely Annie with Indie Annie Jones. Now you're going to find the links to their channels inside of the description box, as well as the playlist for all of the other creators who are participating today. You definitely want to take some time and check out their channels and click that playlist. Once you do that, all the videos will roll one after the other, and I'm sure you're going to be inspired to go ahead and create something fun for your own home. Well, let's go ahead and I'll show you the first steps of how I began this project. Take a screenshot if you'd like to have a record of the measurements of how I cut my wood. Here I'm showing you that if you're going to be looking for wood for, like, say, a 1x8, your numbers are actually going to be smaller. It's because in the olden days, the saws did not cut correctly, but they still kept the same measurements, even though the saws are a lot more accurate today. So when you're looking to buy lumber or purchasing it, the numbers are going to be smaller than the actual lumber size. So a 1x2 is going to measure slightly smaller. Go ahead and give your pieces a sand after you get them cut. I turned my piece upside down and measured 1.5 inches on each side in. This is where I'm going to be drilling the holes for the dowels to go in for my legs. On the sides, I went down 2.5 inches from the top, and this is where I'm going to be placing my arms. To help decide what size of drill bit I needed to use, I put it on the end of my dowel to measure. I didn't have a lot of room here, so when I put my drill in, I kind of give it a wiggle to make my hole slightly larger. I wanted to have my mummy have a kick-up dance leg, so I went ahead and drilled one at a slight angle. After getting them drilled, I went ahead to make sure my legs were still kind of even on the bottom. I used my Sharpie marker to put a mark on where I wanted to drill the hole to be able to connect my shoe. I wanted it slightly back towards the back so I'd have enough of the toe to make it look like it was a shoe. I wanted to have bendable arms for my mummy, so I chose to use 18 gauge aluminum wire. I cut it at about 5.5 inches long. This wire is perfect for bending arms. Once it's bent, it will keep its shape. To decide what size of hole I needed, I did that on a piece of scrap wood so I would know how big to drill my holes. Now let's go ahead and start gluing this piece together. Wood glue is the glue you want to use for this project. It will work on the wire arms as well. I went ahead and I glued it into my feet, the dowels. I put some glue in the hole and then gave it a tap to make sure it was way down at the bottom. When using the wood glue, be generous with it. Make sure you're getting it into your hole and your dowel. You'll notice that a little bit will seep up out the top, and that's okay. Just take a damp paper towel and wipe it off. You could also use a wet rag if you have that handy as well. It's best to be generous when you're using wood glue. This is what's going to hold your piece all together. Once I had my feet on, I went ahead and I turned the piece upside down, added more glue to those under areas, and then added the legs. I gave them a tap with my hammer to make sure they were all the way in. Double check to make sure your feet are even before you finish this process. It took me a bit to figure out what I wanted to use as a base to be able to mount my mummy gal on. I had this wooden box in my stash, so I put some chalk paint over the top, and then I used my paint scraper and scraped the paint back and pushed it in, and I thought it created a very pretty finish, and I was going to go ahead and create a jack-o'-lantern. Because I was going to mount my mummy gal to the top of the box, I needed to figure out how I was going to attach her. I went ahead and I drilled some holes on the top of my shoes. Now, if I had figured out earlier what I was going to do, I most certainly would have done this before I attached my shoes onto those wooden dowels. But I went ahead and drilled the holes in each of the shoes to be able to attach some wire. Once I had my holes drilled, I went ahead and decided where I wanted my little mummy gal to stand and drilled 2 holes through the top of the box to be able to put my wire through to hold her down. Now let's move on to creating some more details on this mummy gal. I wanted a fluffier, puffier kind of a feel to my mummy, so I took some polyfill and some hot glue and glued the polyfill onto my body. She kind of looks like rather like a cotton candy right now, but she's going to be perfectly fluffy when I get done. To create the bandage layers for my mummy gal, I wanted to use different types of fabric, different colors of fabric for the different layers that I was going to be tying on. My first layer is made from muslin. I coffee stained this using about 2 tablespoons of instant coffee and 1 cup of water, soaked my fabric, and then I laid it out onto a cookie sheet inside of the oven at a low temperature, about 200 degrees. Now if you're going to bake fabric, of course, stay close to your oven, don't leave it, keep an eye on it, and it's going to be making a beautiful texture of color inside if you do bake it. If you're not up to baking your fabric, you can always set it outside and let it dry in the sun. You might not get some of those darker areas by doing this, but it'll still be a great look. On this layer, when I'm ending my wraps, I want to make sure they're in cute little bows. So I'm crisscrossing and having a pattern across my little body. Here you can see me working on the bottom. I decided to kind of wrap it like a diaper, so from the back I wrapped it up around her legs and crisscrossed it in the front. This area I ended up just adding a little bit of glue and tucking that extra fabric in the back. To finish the bottom off, I turned her upside down and then kind of tucked my fabric in and glued it. I pinched it around and closed it up. It kind of looked like bloomers at the end, and I thought it was kind of a fun whimsical look to have her dressed in a bloomer look. On the top, I cut one that was just as wide as the top part of her head and then glued it across the top. Then took another piece and then again I wrapped it across and ending the wrapping process with a sweet little bow at the top. I want to make sure I have those little bows because in the end we're going to notice them. Cute, right? To finish off the legs, I used a narrow piece of fabric and wrapped it around the wooden dowel. I did this tightly and then glued it at the top and at the bottom. I created a wire hairpin to be able to slide through the bottom of my shoe. I used jewelry wire that's a little darker in color. I was able to bend it like a hairpin, slide it through the bottom, and pull it tight. This one is just going to be for a decoration. It's the other foot that was going to be acting more like an anchor to my box. Once I had the hairpin all the way through, I was able to take that thinner fabric again and wrap my shoe. I started at the back and then just simply wrapped it around, gluing as I went. I didn't need a lot of fabric on this layer, so I wrapped my shoe once, and then once I had my shoe completely wrapped, I started at the top. The idea for the top is to basically wrap your fabric around the back and then go in and out between the wires. You want to carry it all the way around to the bottom of the foot because you're going to see the bottom of this shoe. Keep those little extra bits of thread. You never know when they're going to come in handy for a bow or other little details. I have a container that I keep on my desk that just has those little bitsy threads in them. I never throw them away. To create the finishing look for the wire, I went ahead and I used a paintbrush. Because it's jewelry wire, it does bend easily. I was able to easily wrap that jewelry wire right around the end of my paintbrush and create a spring type of look. I took a jewelry tool after I wound it tight and then just simply gave the wire a gentle tug and created more of a whimsical look to that little spring type of look. I like the little extra whimsy it created. It looked like she had little ribbons or bows at the end of her shoes. I checked the end of my shoe to make sure everything was glued down and there was no wood showing. For the next layer of fabric, I wanted to change colors and textures. They sell this diaper fabric at Walmart. It's over by the kitchen towel fabric area. They sell them in small packages, but it's got kind of a different texture to it, and this time around I wanted to just basically have strips, tuck them under, and glue them. I wanted to tuck them around those little bows so the bows would pop out against that brighter white fabric. By choosing to use the different fabric and having a different type of texture and color, it really does add to the whimsical nature of this little mummy gal. When crisscrossing across, I'm making sure that I'm not covering up all of that fabric that I first added, but I'm just adding enough of the bright white to bring out the accents of those little bows underneath. eyes for my mummy gal. I used different sizes for each of the eyes and then threaded them with a bright color of orange embroidery floss. I set those down on my mummy gal just to check to see where I might need some more white fabric and if I wanted to cross some of that fabric over her eyes or not. Double check the back to make sure I have everything covered up, and then proceeded to go ahead and wrap the arms. I used the same fabric that I used originally for my gal, and I wrapped the arms very similar to how I did my legs. At the end of the wire, I went ahead and created a loop using my jewelry tool because this little gal is going to be holding a banner, and I needed something to be able to tie the banner to. I wanted my mummy gal to have a big old floppy bow. I used the Bowdabra to be able to help me make this bow. I started with the fabric that was the first layer that I had on my mummy, and then I included the diaper fabric on the top. I cut it a little bit longer than the width of my Bowdabra. The next layers I wanted to do a little bit of a crisscross bow look, so I cut my fabric a little bit longer and crisscrossed it back and forth, trying to get the pattern part in the front, which is always a little bit of a challenge for me. Then I added a little bit of bright colored orange rickrack fabric and then had some green in my stash, so added a layer of that going crisscross back and forth. And then I added a little bit of a black bow in the inside, making a little bow crisscrossing back and forth, getting smaller as I go towards the top. And then the final touches were a little bit of those little bitsy threads and some black creepy cloth just to add a little bit of accent to the center of my bow. Once I took it off, you're able to tie it tight with jute. That's what I had for the center. And I was able to go ahead and cut the fabric just even a little bit more small and rip it to give it a little bit more of that whimsical, jagged edges. Give it a shake, and it makes the perfect little whimsical bow. She's going to be cute. Now on to attaching my mummy gal to the box. I created another one of those wire hairpins, slid it up through, and then attached it to the shoe. But in the end, I did end up screwing her down to the box. The wire just wasn't strong enough to hold my mummy gal. To create the banner, I used this orange felt. The orange felt has a little bit of sizing in it, so it is slightly stiffer than what your regular felt would be. I chose to use a heavier canvas to be able to stamp some letters on in the center of my pennants. I used the black ink to go ahead and stamp the words boo for the center. Once I had my letters stamped, I ended up taking the ink pad and applying the ink around the edges, on the frayed edges, just to bring out a little bit more texture. To add even just a little bit more character to this letter area, I added a little bit of coffee stain to the area. I applied a little bit of water just to be able to spread the coffee stain out. To finish off the pennants, I included a rusted safety pin to the front and glued my letters on. I think it's going to look great. Next up was to turn my attention to what I was going to do to finish off that box. I decided to go ahead and age the orange paint just a little bit by using some more of that coffee stain. At this point, I knew I was going to be making a jack-o'-lantern, so I took one of those extra squares from my pennant, added some coffee stain to that, rubbed it in, and kind of squished it around. Because of the sizing in there, it really did need to get worked in for the coffee stain to stick. I wanted to add a little bit more of the black down to the bottom of my box. So I took that ink pad and slid it across the edges, and I did a little bit of it in the middle as well. I like the idea of having that black down to the part of the lower part. So it brought the black from the eyes and the black from the bow down to the front of my jack-o'-lantern. I thought this jack-o'-lantern would be adorable with a rusty wire smile, so I'm creating it using some rusted wire and my jewelry pliers to be able to bend it. I wanted to have a little bit of a wonky nose, so I created it out of that felt that I had coffee stained and did a little bit of hand stitching around the edges. I wanted to create a little wonky look for the eyes as well, so I chose 2 black buttons that were different sizes. Added orange embroidery floss to the centers of my buttons, and then used coffee stain to darken up the orange. That matches the look of the jack-o'-lantern just slightly better. To attach my rusty smile, I used my staple gun. Once I had the staples in, I used my hammer just to give them a slight tap to make sure they were all the way in. To cover up the bright silver, I used a little bit of black chalk paint. It works great to cover up the metal. And I even added a little bit more dark by using a little bit more paint around my edges. Up next was to create a little bit of a pumpkin top, and I'm going to be using a real one that I had dried out. I usually keep these. If I buy a pumpkin, I keep the stems. I just keep them in my garage and let them dry out. I live in Minnesota, so I do have humidity, cold, hot, but they seem to dry out perfectly in the side of the garage with doing absolutely nothing to them. They do cut a little bit, so I was able to trim the stem to be able to fit it to where I wanted to. And then as a final look, I took some Excelsior in the brown color and put that around the bottom of the base of the stem. I love the whimsical nature of the Excelsior and the character it brings to my projects. Now to attach the banner, I used some jute twine and I tied it to the hands. I gave it a little bit of a slack in the middle so I had a little bit of room to be able to swag the letters across. To attach the pennants on, I used a few little scraps of the felt and just created a little tab behind it, and that made it so much easier to glue it to the tab and have it hold than it was just to glue the pennants on directly by themselves. I'd like to take this time to say a special thank you to our hosts today, Dawn, Monica, and Annie, for putting on this collaboration. Make sure you check out their channels inside of my description box, as well as the playlist for all of the other collaborators from today's collaboration. Let's see what she looks like all done. Give me a thumbs up if you think she's as cute as can be, and leave me a comment and let me know if whimsical is a style you enjoy creating in. If you're new to my channel and you like to do art and crafting, come on over and see what I have to offer. I have many tutorials for drawing and painting over there as well. Well, hopefully you'll come back and see me again, and next time you'll create right along with me.